In 1970, the Grateful Dead's bass player did something that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew the band. Phil Lesh, the classically trained musician who rarely sang, stepped up to the microphone to record a lead vocal. But this wasn't about ego or artistic experimentation. This was about a son who needed to sing to his dying father, and a song that would become the last words the Grateful Dead ever performed together. Most people know Box of Rain as the opening track from American Beauty, one of the Dead's most beloved albums. What they don't know is that it started in the most unlikely place imaginable, a hospital room where a father lay dying and a son desperately wanted to give him something beautiful. In a band famous for 20-minute improvisational jams and psychedelic explorations, this would become their most intimate moment. Phil Lesh wasn't your typical rock bassist. He'd studied classical music, understood composition and theory in ways that set him apart from his bandmates. But when it came to singing, he was completely out of his element. Jerry Garcia was the voice of the Dead, Bob Weir handled the harmonies, and Phil stayed safely behind his bass, anchoring their sound with complex rhythmic patterns. That comfortable arrangement was about to change dramatically. In early 1970, Phil Lesh's father was facing his final days. Lesh, who had spent years laying down the rhythmic foundation for the Dead's psychedelic explorations, found himself confronting something far more personal than any musical challenge. He wanted to sing to his father, but there was one problem. The bass player had never really been a singer. Still, the urge was undeniable, something deeper than musical ambition or creative curiosity. So Lesh did what came naturally to a trained musician. He composed a complete melody, worked out every vocal nuance, every emotional rise and fall. He could hear exactly how it should sound, could feel the emotional weight each note needed to carry. But when it came to the words, he was stuck. The melody was perfect, the feeling was there, but he needed someone who could capture what he was trying to say. He needed someone who understood that this wasn't just another song. This was a final conversation. Enter Robert Hunter, the Dead's longtime lyricist and Jerry Garcia's primary writing partner. Hunter had already proven his ability to channel the band's vision into words, crafting classics like Ripple and Truckin'. But this request was different from anything Jerry had ever brought him. This wasn't about the band's mythology or the counterculture experience. This was about something universal and deeply personal at the same time. Lesh handed him a rough tape of the melody, complete with scat singing where the words should go. Phil's voice wandered through the tune, humming and scatting, searching for the phrases that would say what he needed to say. What happened next was something Hunter would later call magical. As he listened to Phil's tape, Hunter said he could hear English under the melody, as if the words were already there, waiting to be discovered. Hunter wrote the entire lyric in what felt like a single session. The phrases flowed directly from Lesh's vocal phrasing, following the emotional contours Phil had already mapped out. Walk into splintered sunlight, inch your way through dead dreams to another land. Maybe you will find direction around some corner where it's been waiting to meet you. These weren't just words, they were a conversation between a son and a dying father about hope, about letting go, about what comes next. The lyrics painted images that felt both specific and universal. Look out any window, any morning, any evening, any day. These simple observations became profound when filtered through the knowledge that someone was seeing them for the last time. Hunter had somehow captured both the ordinariness of daily life and its infinite preciousness. But Hunter's most inspired choice was the title itself. When fans later asked what Box of Rain meant, Hunter explained it simply. It's the world we live on, he said. This fragile sphere floating in space, holding all our joy and sorrow like raindrops in a container. He considered Ball of Rain, but it just didn't sound right. The word box suggested something more deliberate, more carefully constructed. like the song itself. With lyrics in hand, Lesh faced his next challenge. How do you record a Grateful Dead song that doesn't sound like the Grateful Dead? Because that's exactly what Phil wanted. This wasn't meant to be a psychedelic jam or an experimental soundscape. This was meant to be a gift, something his father could understand and connect with, something that sounded like comfort rather than exploration. The Dead's typical approach involved layers of improvisation, electric guitars feeding back, drums building into thunderous peaks. That sound had defined them, separated them from every other band in rock and roll. But for this song, Phil wanted something entirely different. He wanted something his father could hold on to during his final days, not something that would challenge or confuse him. So when the Dead entered Wally Heider Studios in the summer of 1970, they tried something completely different. Jerry Garcia, the band's lead guitarist and usual focal point, sat down at the piano. Phil himself picked up an acoustic guitar, trading his electric bass for something softer. And for bass and electric guitar, they brought in Dave Torbert and David Nelson from the New Riders of the Purple Sage. The arrangement represented a complete departure from everything the Dead stood for musically. Instead of their usual collective improvisation, this was carefully planned and gently executed. Garcia's piano provided melodies instead of his signature guitar lines, while the country musicians added a warmth that felt more like folk music than rock and roll. The result was unlike anything in the Dead's catalog. Instead of their usual wall of sound, Box of Rain had a gentle country feel, almost like a lullaby. Garcia's piano provided a tender foundation while the other instruments painted delicate colors around Phil's vulnerable vocal. It was exactly what Lesh had envisioned, a song his father could hold on to. But would Dead fans accept something so radically different from their expectations? Lesh spent the final weeks of his father's life driving back and forth to the hospital. During those drives, he practiced singing the song, feeling how perfectly Hunter's words matched what he wanted to say. The melody he'd composed and the lyrics Hunter had written came together in those car rides, becoming something more than the sum of their parts. Such a long, long time to be gone, and a short time to be there. It was both a farewell and a promise that the time they'd had together mattered. The recording session itself became an act of collective support. Garcia, who initially tried to sing the song himself, realized it didn't fit his voice and stepped back to let Phil take the lead. The entire band understood they were witnessing something special, a moment when their usual roles and hierarchies dissolved in service of something bigger. This wasn't about the Grateful Dead as a musical entity. This was about Phil as a son. When American Beauty was released on November 1st, 1970, Box of Rain opened the album. It marked the first time Phil Lesh had ever sung lead on a Grateful Dead recording. Fans were intrigued by this gentler side of a band known for their improvisational adventures. The song introduced the album like a quiet invitation into something more personal than they'd heard before. Critics and fans alike recognized that the Dead had accessed something different here, something that expanded their artistic range. The Dead debuted the song live at the Fillmore East on September 17, 1970, during their acoustic set. The acoustic portion of Dead shows was always more intimate, but this took that intimacy to a new level. Phil's voice, raw and untrained but deeply emotional, gave the song a fragility that no polished vocalist could have matched. This wasn't about technical perfection. This was about truth, about a son's love made audible. The audience reaction was immediate and profound. Here was their bass player, the quiet one who anchored their wildest musical journeys, revealing something completely vulnerable. Fans who had followed the Dead for their musical adventures suddenly found themselves witnessing something more like a confession. The song worked because Phil's inexperience as a vocalist became part of its emotional power. For the next couple of years, Box of Rain appeared sporadically in Dead shows. Sometimes Phil would step forward during the acoustic set. Sometimes the full band would play it electrically. Each performance carried special weight because everyone understood its personal significance. But then, something strange happened. The song began to disappear from set lists. By 1973, Phil had stopped singing it altogether. The reason was both simple and heartbreaking. Phil Lesh had damaged his vocal cords. The bass player who had stepped out of his comfort zone to honor his father found that singing had taken a physical toll. Years of performing in loud environments, combined with his untrained technique, had strained his voice beyond repair. So he made a practical decision. He would return to what he did best, anchoring the band's sound from behind the bass. Box of Rain, the song that had meant everything to him, quietly faded from the Dead's repertoire. But fans didn't forget. As the years passed and the Dead's shows became legendary events, longtime followers would chant, "We want Phil," during concerts. They remembered that gentle country song, that moment of vulnerability from the band's rhythmic backbone. They wanted to hear it again. New fans, discovering the band through live tapes and word of mouth, would learn about this mythical song that Phil used to sing but didn't anymore. For 13 years, through hundreds of shows across America and Europe, Box of Rain remained silent. The Dead played over 750 concerts without it. Fans who had discovered the band in the late 70s or early 80s knew the album version, but had never experienced it live. The song became almost mythical, a beautiful ghost haunting the band's catalog. Its absence made it more powerful, not less. Then, on March 20th, 1986, at Hampton Coliseum in Virginia, something magical happened. Without any announcement or fanfare, Phil Lesh stepped up to the microphone and began singing Box of Rain. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans who had been waiting over a decade to hear this song live erupted in cheers and tears. Some people in the audience had never heard it performed live, only dreamed about it based on stories from older fans. What had changed? Phil's voice had healed, but more than that, he seemed ready to reconnect with this deeply personal piece of music. Maybe enough time had passed since his father's death for the song to transform from a source of grief into something more complex. A celebration of memory, an acknowledgement of loss, and a recognition that beautiful things don't last forever. The 1986 performance felt like a resurrection, not just of a song, but of a relationship between Phil and his own vulnerability. The 1986 bust-out, as Dead fans called it, marked the beginning of Box of Rain's second life. Phil began singing it regularly again, and each performance carried special weight. The song had evolved from a personal gift into something the entire Dead community shared. It became the song they played at memorials, at special occasions, when words alone weren't enough. Fans would request it by shouting for Phil, and when he obliged, the entire venue would fall into reverent silence. But Box of Rain's most significant moment was still to come. On July 9, 1995, the Grateful Dead played their final show at Soldier Field in Chicago. Jerry Garcia would die just a month later, ending the band's 30-year journey. After their official set closer, Black Muddy River, the band returned to the stage for one last encore. 50 musical exploration. Phil Lesh stepped to the microphone and began Box of Rain. Such a long, long time to be gone, and a short time to be there. These became the last words the Grateful Dead ever sang together. A song that began as a son's farewell to his dying father had become the band's farewell to their audience, to their history, to each other. The poetic justice was undeniable. Box of Rain, which had opened American Beauty and introduced fans to a gentler side of the Dead, now closed the book on their entire story. It was as if Phil's father, gone for 25 years, had somehow guided them to the perfect ending of an era, and Box of Rain became their shared farewell. For nearly 3 decades after that final show, Box of Rain lived on in memory and in the solo careers of the surviving members. Phil Lesh continued to play it with various lineups, each performance a reminder of where it all began. The song had become bigger than its origins, a piece of American musical mythology. New generations discovered it through covers and tributes, often without knowing the full story of its creation. Then, on October 25, 2024, Phil Lesh died at the age of 84. Suddenly, Box of Rain took on yet another layer of meaning. The song, written for a dying father, had become a memorial for its creator. Tribute concerts erupted across the country. That very evening, Phish opened their Albany show with Box of Rain, bringing the song full circle to a new generation of improvisational musicians. Social media filled with covers, memories, and reflections on what the song meant to different people. How had a bassist's private moment with his dying father become such a universal hymn? Maybe it's because the emotions Phil captured, love, loss, the preciousness of time, touched something fundamental in all of us. Or maybe it's because, in a world of manufactured emotions and artificial drama, this song represented something genuinely felt and honestly expressed. Robert Hunter once said that if ever a lyric wrote itself, Box of Rain did. He heard English under Phil's melody, as if the words were already there, waiting. But perhaps what he really heard was something even deeper, the universal language of a child's love for a parent, the desperate wish to give something beautiful to someone who's leaving. Box of Rain never became the Dead's biggest hit or most famous song. It was never their most musically complex or improvisationally adventurous, but it may have been their most important, because it proved that behind all the psychedelic exploration and musical experimentation, the Grateful Dead understood something essential about what music is really for. It's for the moments when we need to say something we can't find words for. It's for connecting across the space that separates us from the people we love. It's for turning our private sorrows and joys into something we can share. Phil Lesh discovered this truth in the most personal way possible, and in doing so, he gave the world something it didn't know it needed. Today, when people play Box of Rain at funerals or memorial services, do they think about Phil's father lying in that hospital bed in 1970? Probably not consciously, but that original intention, that pure desire to comfort someone who's suffering, still resonates in every note. The song carries that DNA of love and loss, making it perfect for moments when we need to acknowledge that someone important is leaving or has left. Phil Lesh wanted to sing to his dying father, so he wrote a melody. Robert Hunter heard that melody and found the words that were already there. Together, they created something that outlasted both of them, something that continues to offer comfort to anyone who has ever faced loss. They created a song that understands what it means to be human in a world where nothing lasts forever. In the end, Box of Rain became exactly what Phil intended, a gift from a child to a parent. It's just that the parent turned out to be all of us, and the child was the part of us that never stops looking for ways to say I love you while there's still time. Such a long time to be gone and a short time to be there. In our Box of Rain, floating through space, that's all any of us really have. Phil Lesh understood that, and he gave us a song to help us remember.